I think people like to fight, people like to argue, and so when you do go out and advocate, not everyone's going to agree with what you're doing. So that's why I say it's so important to know why you're doing it and really connect and tie into that why. Because if you don't have that desire for it, you're just going to end up hurting yourself in the end. You have to really know what you want to do and how you're going to do it. It's okay to not know that in the beginning, but just know that you have your back and you can trust yourself in this process.
Hey everyone, welcome back to another episode of Oh My Curry Goodness. My name is Hamza Islam. On each episode of this podcast, I talk to Gen Zers from different fields about their story and the experiences that have shaped them into who they are today. Now, if you are checking this podcast out for the first time and you thought this was a podcast about curry, I'm sorry. I wish I could do that, but I'm not a good cook, although I am a work in progress. However, the reason why I came up with the name Oh My Curry Goodness is when we hear stories that are interesting or inspiring or shocking in any way, we say, oh my goodness. And I included curry because it's my favorite food. But when it comes to listening to people, I want to be able to connect with my guests. And hopefully, you guys as listeners join me in connecting with the guests in a unique way. Because while people have done incredible things in their life, and we should applaud them for the work that they're doing, it's also important to talk about the challenges and experiences that have shaped them into who they are today. Because while many of us may not relate to the successes they've had, we can definitely relate to all the challenges and experience that we are currently facing or we have once faced. So I hope you guys continue to join me in taking valuable lessons from each guest as we continue to write our own story and find out what our purpose is and what that special thing we want to create, because we all have that ability, but it's also important to talk about those experiences and just being known for simply being a human being. Now, my guest this week is Annmarie Gajdos, who is a content creator and activist who also and a storyteller who uses her background as a first generation Slovak American to connect people and amplify underrepresented voices through media and technology. One of the cool things about Annmarie, obviously, like I mentioned, she is a storyteller. She wants to amplify underrepresented voices, but we also are either currently pursuing or once majored in the same major. So Annmarie is a computer science major, just like myself. So it's a great way to, I guess, connect in a way. But nevertheless, Annmarie, thank you so much for joining. Oh my curry goodness.
Hi, everybody. Thanks for having me. I'm super excited to be here. So just a little bit about me. My name is Annmarie Gajdos. I am 25 years old. My family is Slovak American, but I live in New York City, and I have for a very long time. I currently work full-time at HBO in accounting, but I'm also a journalist, activist, content creator. I kind of like to do a lot of different things. And when I was in college, I did study computer information systems and also music management. So something we have in common, and now I've kind of diverged from that path a little bit.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming in. Thank you for the introduction. Now, one of the things that I want to first talk about is your family, because you have mentioned in the past how family means a lot to you, and that's something that a lot of my guests have actually talked about in the past, where family means a lot to them. As someone who is a first generation immigrant from Slovakia, um, tell me a bit about the pressure you have in terms of making your parents proud. Because the thing, I can't relate to your personal story. My parents are born in Bangladesh, which is in South Asia, but I was born in the United States. So like I can't understand the struggles that they had directly, and I never will understand that because I didn't live that experience. But you kind of had that chance to see that growing up. When it comes to seeing all the things that your parents have done for you and everything that you've learned from them, and then seeing what they had to do to give you the life that you are living today, what is that pressure like in terms of trying to make your family proud? As ridiculous as that question can be, I think it's still an important question, especially given depending on the relationship people have with their parents.
Definitely. You did mention something important. Family is crucial for me. They've always been my biggest support system. They've done everything they can to make my journey and my dreams become a reality. But at the same time, because they did come from a country where they were facing communism, they had a lot of problems there. They sacrificed a lot to get to the States, to New York, and to take care of me. There was definitely a lot of pressure, and there still is quite a bit of pressure. I think my parents always had one vision for my career, what they thought I was going to do. They thought I was going to be a lawyer. And for a very long time, I thought that's what I was going to do as well. I had planned to go to law school in college, or rather, when college finished. I graduated in 2020, and it was during the pandemic, and I decided I did not want to go back to school. I lied to myself for maybe like 2 years. I bought all the LSAT books, I bought all the prep. I was like, yeah, I'm going to law school. And after a few years, I realized it really wasn't my passion. I wanted to do something more creative, some more based in entertainment. My parents were super disappointed. I remember when I first signed on for my job at HBO, my mom was like, how could you do this? Why would you do this? You made it in computer science, like blah blah. I was like, Mom, I'm it's a major company. Like, why are you so upset? I was like, people dream for opportunities like this. And eventually they did. They got over it, and they were like, okay, like Annmarie's gonna do what Annmarie needs to do, and we have to support her. And everybody's dreams are valid. So I think there just came a point where I had to understand that my parents' pressure comes from a place of love. It comes from a place of wanting to support me, wanting to see me succeed and have a really great life. I just think sometimes people don't know what's best for you. You know what's best for you, and someone can guide you and give you advice and stuff. And that's where I look to my parents for, and what I get from them in that relationship right now. But the pressure, I was like, after a while, I had to just be like, I'm 25, almost 26 now. I can't let this pressure hold me back. I can't live a life that someone else wants me to live. I have to live the life I want to live for myself.
I love the way you ended that question, which is you want to live, you can't afford to hold on to this, but you want to live for yourself. And I think that's really interesting. I kind of feel the same way, but I also feel like at the end of the day, I still want to hold on to this. I do want to be able to make my parents proud because it's like, like what kind of like what do you want to do to, I guess, not live up to the family legacy, but like to carry on that family legacy. So when they're gone, what are you going to do to honor everything? And as cliche as it sounds, I still find that pressure just because it's not like about like I'm going to live my personal life. It's more of like, you're like coming into the United States, like I think every immigrant family will talk about the struggles they had in their home country, and then this idea of having a better life in the United States. So you're living here and you have your challenges, but you're able to create something special for multiple generations. And so it's almost like carrying that torch in a way. I will say, and I don't know, obviously you are one of many people who are Slovakian American, but for me, I also feel like I get a lot of pressure from community as well because in like South Asian cultures, people look at like the Fantastic Four, I call it, like science, technology, engineering, math, and it's like, wait, you're doing podcasting or you're being a content creator, you're working for HBO. Why are you not working for this company that can pay you a lot of money? I remember I was at a grad party and this guy said, when you go to college or when you graduate, computer science, right? And I'm like, yeah. And I said yes, but it's also like, yes, don't get me wrong, I love talking to robots, but I also love talking to human beings as well. So I don't know about you or how I guess like the Slovakian culture, but I know in like certain cultures like South Asian, it's like it's either you are a STEM field or you're a failure. I don't know because obviously like you talked about your parents, but I don't know how it looks like in Slovakian cultures.
Yeah, I think it's pretty similar. I think there are definitely different challenges based on the culture you're in, but I think there's always this overall idea of what a successful path or field looks like. And I think it's not only cultural, I think it's also generational. I think times have changed. I think even a lot of like the way that like work looks, like my parents had this idea that I'd start a job and I'd be there for my whole life. Whereas now we're in an age where like you stay 2, 3 years, and if you're not getting what you need from that company, you're looking for another place where you can grow or another avenue to pursue that'll help you. And so I think that's part of it as well. The Slovak American community, at least in New York, or just in general, actually, is quite small. So it's a small country. It used to be part of one country, Czechoslovakia. It split in 1993 with Czech Republic. Even to this day, it's very, very small. Not that many people know about it. The community is very tight knit in New York, but it's still quite small. It's very tied to religion as well. We're Eastern Orthodox Christian, or at least most of us are. And so for me, I grew up going to like my church in the city. I lived in Staten Island, and we would like drive an hour and a half to get to church every Sunday. And that's kind of where we had like our Slovak traditions, where we spoke in Slovak. Like people in my immediate community didn't really know what Slovakia was, or they just assumed I was Russian, maybe Ukrainian. So it was just kind of all lumped together with Eastern Europe. Um, And I think from that, there's a lot of pressure. Even like I don't go to church as much as I used to. I'm busy and I'm personally not that religious. I go really more for like cultural things. And I think there's a lot of pressure, kind of like, okay, you're too American, or maybe you're not Slovakian enough. Maybe you need to learn your language more. Or you need to like spend more time with your grandparents. You have to go back to Slovakia more. And I think that's also just a lot of pressure from the community as well. And I had to just get to a point where I was like, I am not fully Slovakian. I'm Slovak American, and there's nothing wrong with that. It's different, and like the times are changing, and our culture is changing, and that's okay. It's okay to hold on to the traditions, but also recognize that you're a product of different communities. Even when I travel a lot, so I'm a product of all the people I meet and the different cultures I interact with. Like there's all these different things that mesh together, and I think sometimes people put a lot of pressure on you to be who your parents were, who you're around.
One thing I will say is I relate to when people don't know much about Slovakia. So as someone who has parents from Bangladesh, people think that's India, and it's not the same thing. We have different cultures. We share a lot of things in common, but we are two different countries. So I can definitely relate to you on that. And as far as like this identity of like the Slovakian part and the American part, I think in broad sense, it's really hard to balance these two. And I think that's something that we all have to figure out in our, well, not just like if you're Slovakian, I mean, like any other identity you have. So if you're American and then you have some sort of other identity, it's hard to balance them. But I think that's a challenge that all of us have to figure out for us personally.
Definitely. Yeah. I think it's important. And I used to have like a bit of an identity crisis over it because I wanted to like maintain those strong roots, but there are also communities I interacted with more when I was traveling and places I would go a lot. And I felt like I felt more connected to that sometimes than my own heritage. And I had almost like guilt about it. And even like my church, I used to be really tied in with the Jewish community on my campus. And I went to Israel a couple of times, visited Palestine. I was very like interested in like the human rights aspect of it. And I would come back and everyone at my church would be like, you're Jewish now. And I'm like, guys, it doesn't work that way. I'm just interacting, I'm learning, I'm exploring. And so I feel like there's a bit of guilt about it. Like I'm contributing so much to another community. Like how do I also contribute to my own community?
One of the things we have in common, well, as I was getting to know you, obviously computer science major, loves storytelling. I also realize you also have your own podcast that I'd love to talk about later on. But there's something that I think it's something that a lot of people struggle with, but I feel like yours is a very interesting story, but which is the issue of perfectionism. As a podcaster, that is a nightmare for me because I feel like every interview I strive for perfection. But I also found out that were a valedictorian for not just your high school, but for your college as well. And so in my mind, I'm thinking, so I'm literally going to be talking to a human calculator. That's literally what I'm thinking of. But you talked about how you struggled with depression and perfectionism. Where do you feel like that came from? And I guess, like, what did your life look like when you're having that issue? Because I've not been diagnosed with anything, and I've been open about this in the past where like I do strive for perfection in everything. So not just in school. That could be because of culture issues, because I've seen the memes like South Asians prefer 100%, not 99.9%. I think as a podcaster, you want to have the most perfect conversation. I think everything is so perfect and usually takes more time. So that's kind of what my relationship with perfectionism looks like. I'm curious to know because I was like, wow, a human calculator can struggle with perfectionism. What did that look like? And then I guess where do you feel like that issue kind of like stemmed from?
Yeah, definitely. So, I mean, I think part of it is that I'm just very competitive. Whenever I do something, I want to give it my all. And so I always like the idea of being number one was like very appealing to me. So I was valedictorian in middle school, high school, and college. So I was just like, anytime I went somewhere and we had like some sort of awards, I really just was like, I need this. I want to do it. But I think somewhere along the way, I kind of lost the love for the competition and it started basing my worth and like my achievement, like based on my achievement level. And so I think for me, I realized this during COVID. It kind of took me a while to understand that this is what was happening because I was still in school and like I'd been in school for my whole life. I didn't know much else. And it was once I started working where like these ideas of like getting an award or getting something like where you're notified and like your achievement is displayed to multiple people, that's kind of like not a thing when you start working. You kind of just make money and maybe you get a promotion and and then you make some more money. And for me, I was like, oh my gosh, like, how do I know that I'm doing a good job? How do I know that I'm the best? Or how do I know that this is like what I'm supposed to be doing? And so I think around that time, that's when I started working on the perfectionism and being like, you know what, I have to focus more on things that bring me passion, things that drive me and excite me. And that's kind of why I started switching more from like the pre-law computer science, like things that are more creative, things that I'm actually interested in. Because I found that like when you're a perfectionist, I truly believe anybody can do anything that they put their mind to. It's just whether or not you actually want to do it. And I feel like in school, you're forced to do a lot of things you don't want to do because you have to pass and you have to get good grades or you're not going to get your diploma. And then who knows, maybe you won't get a job, right? But when you're working, it's like, I don't actually have to do this unless I want to. I could do another job. There are so many other options out there. And so I kind of came to the point where I was like, you know what? I don't have to be a perfectionist about everything. I can just focus on doing things that feel good and make me happy. Especially with creative things that you can't do it perfectly. Like, what does that mean? You know, when I loved math because it was very like by the book when I was in school. And so in math, there's a right answer and there's a wrong answer. When I'm doing a podcast, there's no right answer or wrong answer. It's just, oh, maybe I could have structured this interview better. Maybe I could have asked better questions or done better research. Other than that, there's no like what does it mean to have a perfect podcast? That's not a thing. You know what I mean? Like when you're in the real world, you can't even like a musician, they'll have like a number one single. But for how long? Like then the charts change, things change. Like you can't like this idea of being number one, you can't be the best at everything. And I kind of had to like come to terms with that and just realize that my competition was really with myself and focus on what does feeling good about my work and achievement look like for me.
I would love everything you said, especially when it came to like math, which is like the idea of right or wrong answer, and then like let's say podcasting because we're doing a podcast. There's no right way to do a podcast, and that was something I struggled with for a long time, and I feel like I'm doing a better job of getting away from the idea of perfection, although it does take time. But I will say it was funny because my semester just started at Ohio State, and I'm taking a class on it's like it's not necessarily, I guess it's like a human resource class where it's like you're managing people. And one of the first things we talked about is like, you can't, especially let's take podcasts. There is no memorizing by the book. It's just one of those. It's like it's an experience in some sense where you learn as you go. Your first episode will be different from your most recent episode, unless your recent episode was your second episode. But if you have your first episode and your 50th, there are some differences because there's a lot of learning, and especially like when you talked about creativity in art in an art space, there is no right answer. It's just you do as you go. And I think those classes, even though I'm a computer science major and I love like building websites and talking to robots, just in case someone's like, does he like computer science? I do like computer science. I do think that you are limiting creativity by just looking for a right or wrong answer. I do love those fields where it's like it's open ended. It's not necessarily about right or wrong. It's like let's have these discussions and just think about why do they believe in this or what are they trying to do with this, and let's see if we can figure out a way to make it better. I know 2 + 2 = 4, and unfortunately, that's the end of the conversation. But let's talk about something where it's like, here's a creative idea that we think can benefit people, and whatever that may be. And even if it's not 100% right, how can we just continue to make it better 1%? I think these are cool things, and I think that's what makes creativity fun, which is there is no concrete answer. Which I know sometimes you need that, but there are moments where it's like you can't underestimate it because creativity requires dialogue, communication, and when you do that, it makes it more not just fun but also insightful and beneficial to communities that you may be serving.
Yeah, I agree. And it's funny because I think perfectionism also comes out of this fear of failure. And like, I mean, what does failure even mean? It's so different and based on the person you talk to and what their interests are. Um, but even for me, like with my podcast, when I first started, I never wanted to listen to it back. I do it with my best friend, and she would be the one who like not edits, but she'll send me the cuts and stuff to the episode if we have to change anything. And I would want to cut out anytime I had a pause or I like slipped up on a word or I said or something I didn't like. And after a while, I was like, this is so unrealistic. People they don't want to hear something that's perfect. They want to hear something that's real and authentic. And that's why I love storytelling. It's like you're speaking from the heart. You're not always going to say the right thing, but if you come from the right place, I think that's what's really important. I kind of had to rework my frame of mind into thinking that, especially with the podcast, you hear some stuff and you're like, oh man, I wish I'd asked them this question. It would have been such a great transition or something. Then I'm like, you know what? I'll save that feedback and I'll take that into consideration for the next time because it's a process. You're always learning, you're always growing. So there's no way to do it 100% right the first time. And if you keep beating yourself up, that's what the perfectionism does. You know, it stems from anxiety, it stems from that fear of failure. And if you keep pursuing it and being more antagonistic, it's nothing's going to change. It's going to get worse and you're going to feel really bad about yourself. What's the point in that? I don't want to like walk around feeling bad all the time when I'm creating stuff that I'm proud of. Like, why even create then?
For sure. And I feel like as if everyone is a work in progress no matter where they are. And I guess when it comes to podcasting, the one reason why I feel like I have to strive for perfection is I remember there was an activist, I'm not going to say this person's name, but this act I was talking about how we could potentially promote the episode. This was back before I started this podcast when I was still trying to reach out to people, and I was talking about, hey, would you be willing to promote the podcast? And this person said, maybe, I don't know. If Joe Rogan asked me this, I would of course do it. And so I thought to myself, so because I'm not Joe Rogan, you're not going to share our conversation. So that's when I feel like every episode has to be like the best, especially, and it's hard because when no one knows who you are, it's really hard to promote or market yourself. And so that's why I feel like I'm doing that. But one of the things I want to do with 2024 is just focus less on what other people say or their expectations and just try to have a genuine conversation, because those ums, buts, likes, those filler words or those pauses, that's a human moment, not a robotic moment. And I think people who listen to your podcast, and I've listened to a few episodes with your friend, people want to hear a human. They don't want to hear a robot, which ironic because we're computer science majors. But that's kind of where I'm going with this, because I feel like, yeah, we're both humans, and we let's accept the fact that we're not perfect. And if we do that, then even though we still have challenges, I think we might have a better mindset when it comes to tackling certain things.
Definitely. Yeah, I think it's true. I think people want to hear something that's authentic and real. And it's funny you said the thing about the activists. I feel like another component is that fear of like people not liking what you're going to say, or like you saying the wrong thing. You know, cancel culture is real and alive. And sometimes I don't know, I do say the wrong thing if I want it to be authentic and raw. You know, I'm going to go down the wrong road, or I'm going to need someone to steer me in the right direction. And I think learning to like love myself and like steer away from that perfectionism was also realizing that I'm going to make mistakes and that's okay. And like I can own it if I do make a mistake, and you just have to learn from it. And it's okay. It's totally okay to make a mistake.
Yeah, for sure. I appreciate you saying that. And I remember when I first reached out to you, I was like, oh man, Anne-Marie's done so much. She's gonna say no to this. And then you said yes, and I was like, great. And also, what a cool way to connect with a informational systems or computer science major. Um,
Definitely. Yeah. I love my computer information systems majors. It's funny because people always like hardcore coding. And so when I find an information systems major, I'm like, oh, so cool. We did something similar.
uh, I do want to talk about computer science later on, but let's talk about storytelling and finding your purpose, because you are someone, when I say you've done a lot, I mean you literally have. When I was doing my notes, I think the accomplishments or the things you've done was one page of everything that you've done, whether it's volunteering, traveling to different countries. I think there was one where you were a English teacher in Myanmar and Thailand, for those who are at risk of human trafficking. You advocate for people when it comes to whether it's gender equality, marginalized communities. There's so many things that you've done, and one of the things I feel like a lot of people actually have, I think a lot of people really want to be able to help people. It doesn't have to be anything like big compared to what you do, but just the idea of being able to help, just the idea of being able to help one person. I think everyone has that, but there's also this belief, self-belief or self-confidence that you are able to do that. When did you realize that this is something that you could possibly do? Because while everyone can have that ability, sometimes there's this thing where it's like they start asking so many questions like, can I help them? What can I do? What are the like what if I mess this up? Like I guess perfectionism plays a part in a way. When did you realize that you had this ability to be an advocate for other people or give people hope in a way that they may not have had if you never helped them in the first place?
So I was lucky in that when I first started doing a lot of this volunteering and a lot of these programs, they kind of just not fell into my lap, but they were very active at my school. And so I started in like a group setting. So we'd go into a community, like even when we were volunteering abroad, there'd be like at least 5 or 6 of us. So it kind of took a little bit of the pressure off because I'm with a group of people. We most of us haven't done all of these types of projects. And so we're all kind of learning and doing it together on the spot. And so for me, I really like doing things like that. I like to like dip my toe in, kind of work with other people, learn from it, and then from there I can take off and focus on my strengths and what I can actually build. I think it was only the last couple of years, like during the pandemic, that I was able to realize how I could actually use my strengths on my own and my platforms to advocate for different people. And I think it just came down to me sitting down and being like, what do I want to do? What can I do? And like I said, my strengths and talents, like where do I excel? What am I good at? And for me, it's always been communication. So I've started to realize that for me, I love creating content and stuff like that, but I also just love speaking to people and facilitating conversations and having people speak to people who have different backgrounds and different ideas than them and just sit down and actually listen instead of fighting. And so that's kind of why I started the podcast. And it's where I realized that's kind of what I wanted to do in terms of advocacy and helping people, just facilitating those conversations and getting different mindsets and viewpoints out there to kind of burst your bubble. It's funny because in the States, I live in New York, and we think of ourselves as like the most diverse place in the country. And then I go down to Florida to see my parents. They moved down there, and I see like, I mean, Florida's fine. This is not like a Florida bashing thing, but it's a very different environment and culture and different mindset than New York. And I think we forget about that there's so many other places in our country and we have so much to learn from each other. I think we fight a lot, and it's like there's so many issues politically and things that have been happening. And I think if we could just sit down and actually speak to one another, I feel like maybe we wouldn't be having these issues anymore. So I think that's kind of it's just a process of growth and realizing, why am I doing this and what can I do to help. The other thing is, it is really scary. Like even to this day, sometimes I'll post things about issues I'm really passionate about or things I've learned, and I get bad feedback sometimes. Like people will message me and they'll like yell at me and they'll be like, what are you talking about? I'm like, first of all, my experience cannot be wrong. You can't invalidate my feelings or my experience. And second of all, I think people like to fight, people like to argue. And so when you do go out and advocate, not everyone's going to agree with what you're doing. So that's why I say it's so important to know why you're doing it and really connect and tie into that why. Because if you don't have that desire for it, you're just going to end up hurting yourself in the end. You have to really like know what you want to do and how you're going to do it. It's okay to not know that in the beginning, but just know that you have your back and you can trust yourself in this process.
When you were talking about learning about different cultures, not just internationally, but statewise, I think that's also important as well because as someone who lives in Columbus, Ohio, the way people live in Florida or New York or Los Angeles or anywhere is different. So I do appreciate that because I think it's easy to know that people from different countries have different cultures, but it's also important to note that, especially in different states, their way of living is different as well. As someone who loves talking to people, was that a skill that you feel like you've had for almost your whole life, or is that something you picked up? Because with podcasting, I would say I think my journey as a person who loves talking to people, it was a roller coaster because there was one period of time where I loved talking to people, and then before starting this podcast, I was a bit nervous talking to people, and then now with the podcast, I feel like it's more of a mix. Like there are days where I love talking to people, and then there are days where I am afraid to talk to people for some reason. So it's an up and down roller coaster. For you, you've obviously been able to travel a lot of places, and you obviously, like you said, you have your own podcast. Has the extrovert in you been there the whole time, or do you feel like that's something you had to learn along the way?
So I describe myself as an introverted extrovert. I think I always had a talent for speaking and communicating, but I think that over time, just society wise, even just being in school, I was never a troublemaker, but I love like talking to the teacher and asking questions. And I think not everybody has that same desire to learn or like be active in that way by speaking. So I think after being in school for so long, I was starting to get afraid to like talk to people, and like I was afraid to say the wrong thing. And I felt like I was kind of it's a lot of internal pressure, I think. And so I had to like relearn how to speak and communicate with people in terms of like doing things like if I were to be interviewed or a podcast, I love stuff like that. But in terms of like just going up to someone and starting a conversation, that was always really intimidating to me just because I'm a little bit self-conscious. I don't want them to think I'm being weird or like make them uncomfortable or anything. So I kind of had to like get over that fear. But growing up, I really loved speaking. Like even my sister and I, we went to Ireland when we were little. my parents believe this is where I acquired this gift of conversation, but they have this thing called the Blarney Stone. You have to like lean over a ledge and you kiss it, and it's supposed to give you the gift of gab, which means you never stop speaking. I've been told I had this gift before I even kissed the stone, but I like to think it enhanced it a little bit. And then I've been thinking recently I should go back and like try it out again because I feel like I need to up my skills a bit. But I think that might be where some of it started from. But yeah, I think it's a talent, but I think anyone can take a talent and turn it into a skill. It's just about the dedication and really pushing yourself and putting yourself in uncomfortable situations. Even with my podcast, like because I do it with my best friend, I feel like sometimes I can rely on her. Like if there's a question I don't want to ask, I'll be like messaging her on the side. And I'm like, hey, can you ask this question? I don't feel 100% comfortable. And so having that like second host is really helpful sometimes. But now I've gotten into a space where we've done so many episodes and talked to so many external guests that we didn't know that I can kind of be like, okay, I think I can ask anything I want to ask and not be too afraid. But it took me a while. I mean, we've been doing the podcast for 3 years, but the first couple of years we were doing it with like most of the guests were our friends. And I think this is the first year we really branched out and started inviting other people in, people we didn't know, like people we just pitched ourselves to. There was one girl on the podcast who's like a semi-famous musician, and we were like, oh my God. Like it was we were so excited, but we were also really stressed because we were like, oh my God, we have to be like really legit. Like we can't mess around this episode. And I think just having that practice is so good. You need to practice. It's such a cliche thing. I'm not gonna say practice makes perfect, but practice, it makes you get better. And you're constantly going to be getting better. Even in like years, let's say you do a podcast for years, you're going to look back in 4 years and be like, wow, I've come so far. You're never going to be like, oh, I hated this first episode I did. You're going to be like, wow, I can't believe how much I've grown. It's kind of cool. It's like a physical timeline that you can see and kind of compare yourself to. So if you're actually interested in self-growth and like reaching your fullest potential, I guess, whatever that means, then you can see it. You can see it, you can listen to it, you can hear it, and it's really helpful.
Yeah, and the way you phrased it, I think that's a mindset thing, right? Like, oh, not I hate to, but like look how far I've grown. There is that, it's that growth mindset. It's having that, even though it was bad, we can take a few positives from it. A few questions before I let you go. I want to ask you some of my favorite questions I've been asking lately on the podcast because it's a human moment. One's more comical, one's more reflective. I want to ask the reflective one first. As someone who I just use the word as a someone who has traveled to many countries, been able to help a lot of people, someone who was a valedictorian in middle school, high school, college, and someone who's continuing to pursue storytelling and advocating for people. I think you and I can both agree that many of us can say that, or I think many of you, or I think you and I and many other people can say that experiences in the past, good or bad, can definitely shape into the person we are today and who we want to be in the future. For you, and only if you're comfortable talking, I don't want you to say anything that makes you too uncomfortable, but what are some of the negative experiences that you had where were at the time you hated going through these experiences, but you're able to look back and say, even though I hated this experience, I'm glad that I went through it in a way because it shaped me into the person I am today.
Yeah, I think the big one that comes to mind was the college application process. I like my parents and I, we thought I was a shoe-in for an Ivy League. Like I was convinced I was going to Columbia or like Princeton. Like, I mean, I had no doubts in my mind. I thought this was where I was going. And then college application season came around. I sent all my apps in. I thought I was doing great. I came back and I was pretty much rejected from like almost every school I had applied to, except the one I went to that I'm actually very happy I did go to. But besides the point, I think it was a time where I think I put so much pressure on myself and I was just like, what did I do wrong? Like, why don't they want me? And for a while, I was super, super depressed about it. And I think it kind of put me like into a shell. I was always really extroverted. And after that, for like a couple of years, I was kind of like, I didn't want to try anything new, do anything new. I didn't want to do anything out of my comfort zone. It took me a while to kind of branch out and do that again. But I'm kind of glad. I think rejection is good. As much as like as a perfectionist, I would never have said that like in years past. I've grown quite a bit. Like rejection is actually really good. A lot of people say rejection is redirection. I'm not going to say that, but like when you can handle a rejection, it kind of makes you realize you can handle anything, and you realize that it's actually not that serious. Like the school wasn't really that important anyway. But what was important was the opportunities I got from going to school. And I got a lot of opportunities from the college I did go to. That's the reason I was traveling so much. I was traveling for free and doing all these things where I was meeting people that are now contacts that I have that will help me get jobs or help me with people for my podcast. And like, it just broadened the way that I think And I find that either way, I ended up where I needed to be. And I realized that it's because of me. I wasn't anyone else or an external factor. I made the best of it. And then I got to where I needed to go. And I think that's just something important to consider.
Yeah, thank you so much for sharing that. And it's difficult. Now, it's funny because for me, when I did my college application, I only wanted to go to Ohio State because it was literally close to my house. Um, and so I was glad for that experience, but I can say that there are a lot of people that are really smart and talented and have a great, you know, high school, middle school career, and yet they don't get into those Ivy League schools. But at the end of the day, yeah, in a way, rejection is redirection, but I also think that just because you went through this experience, it doesn't mean that you are a person. And it's funny because someone said, you're not necessarily missing out on them, they're missing out on you. So to Columbia and Princeton, they're missing out on Annmarie, not the other way around.
Yeah, I like that. That's what I'm gonna tell them. But yeah, I told myself I was like, one day when I make it big, I'm like, I'm gonna make sure everybody knows where I did go to college and where I didn't. So I'm like, that's my Scorpio moon. I'm always like, I'll make sure I get the last laugh.
They're gonna have FOMO. um, you are very passionate about a lot of things, especially when it comes to giving back, amplifying voices, storytelling, computer science, and so forth. What are some things you don't like about the things that you like? Because when it comes to passion, we think that just because you're passionate about something, it means that you won't have that many challenges, or you're going to have a much better mindset than going into something that you don't have passion in. But what I've come to realize is that even if you are passionate about something, there are things you don't like that you have to do. So in your case, what are some things you don't like about the things that you're passionate about?
I like things that I can complete. Like I like having a to-do list and being able to check things off. It feels really good to me to be like, okay, I finished this, I'm done. The work that I do, it's never done. There's no such thing as done. I can always do more. I can always edit more, reach out to more people. Like the work never stops. And so I have to find a way to stop myself and be like, okay, today I did enough work and we can wait till tomorrow. When I get really excited or really amped up on an idea, it's like I just want to go, 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 and I don't want to stop. And then I forget that I'm like a human being and I need to like breathe and eat and sleep. And so I feel like that can be a lot for me, like not having the energy or just not having the time. Um, yeah, I think those are the biggest ones. The things I really don't like. I don't like answering emails and things like this. I waste so much time. I feel like doing like menial things like shooting emails to people like to promote the podcast or like scheduling social media posts. I love actually creating the content, but I hate doing the promotion and posting it and then having to put hashtags and schedule it for the best time. I just want to put out what I create and like I feel like it should just be received. I should not have to do anything additional.
For sure. Yeah, that's definitely a challenge. But yeah, it's another example of just because you love the things that you do, it doesn't mean that you're not going to enjoy every second of it. It's more of embracing every second, not enjoying. You have been a big proponent of the term, or someone who's been embracing a lot of challenges. You love the term uncomfortable, because you are always finding ways to promote yourself, which is uncomfortable. Like you can't just do that. It takes courage. How would you advise other people? And obviously, they may not be doing the things that you're doing, but what advice would you give to people in terms of being uncomfortable with being comfortable? Or I guess in simpler terms, I guess the other way around. How do you convince people to be comfortable with being uncomfortable? I don't know, they're the same thing, but I like wording it differently.
Yeah, so I started doing this challenge like 2 months ago, and every day I do one thing that scares me, and it sounds so ridiculous. Like it could be something so small, like I don't know, like I'm at Starbucks and I don't want to inconvenience the worker and be like, I'm sorry, can I have more ice or something like this? Like, but it's crazy because it actually makes a difference. Like after a week, I started being like, oh my God, I can actually go up to people and ask them anything I want, Like so every day I recommend going out and doing one thing that scares you. That doesn't mean you have to go skydiving or like quit your job, but like it could be something super, super small, like messaging a friend that you haven't heard from in a while and being like, hey, like, how are you? Or like telling a friend you want to speak about something serious or yeah, just like interacting with a stranger on the subway. That's a good one. I did that the other day and it felt so empowering because people don't talk to each other on the subway. I was like, hi, like I like your shirt. And it's something that's so like seems so stupid, but it's actually like the more you build yourself up, the more you're able to actually then conquer something later on that's actually really big. I think it's just a really big mindset thing and kind of like turning that autopilot off. I don't like living on autopilot, but I feel like sometimes I do, especially like living in a city, like you got to get to work, get home, and like you're just very busy. And so I feel like doing that not only helps, it helps you be comfortable with being uncomfortable, but also at the same time turns off that autopilot and helps you like actually feel like you're not a robot and you're like living your life.
I'm gonna try to apply that when it comes to spiders. Hopefully, I can overcome that fear. Last question. You are a computer science major. I do want to ask you this. What are some skills you picked up as a computer science major? It could be on the technical side or on the soft skill side.
I think the skills that I learned were more so just this idea of I'm not going to be good at everything and that's okay. When I first started learning like coding languages, I did C++ and I hated it. I absolutely hated it. So uninterested. And like when it came to my final exams and stuff, I had to actually sit down and really teach myself because I was zoning out in class. And I realized that you can do the most incredible things and learn the most incredible amount of information in a short amount of time if you're actually really like focused and willing to work on it and put that hard work in. And so I realized that everything is really just a process. It takes time and you're not going to see results immediately. And that's totally cool. But you will see the results eventually. Like there is like a light at the end of the tunnel. And I feel like when you're in college, you don't realize that because your life has always been school and maybe like part-time jobs or internships or something. But when you step out of it, I feel like after a while you can look back and be like, oh, like nothing lasts forever. Like there will be an end time frame to this feeling or this thing, and then you'll eventually learn that skill. Like it's there's always something that comes after. It's never going to be completely the same.
Couldn't agree anymore. Anne-Marie, I know you are a busy person, but I just want to say thank you so much for joining the podcast and for being able to share your story and the experiences you have that have shaped you into who you are today. I wish you nothing but the best for the future, and hopefully we get to meet in person someday.
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much for having me. I had a great time. And if anybody wants to hear me chat and blab more, feel free to check out my podcast, Sweet 15. Welcome to Sweet 15 on Instagram, and you can find us on Spotify and all the platforms. But I had such a great time chatting with you today. Honestly, these are some really good questions. So I hope you have more confidence. Like, I don't know, I feel like you're a really good interviewer and the questions are really solid. So excited to listen to more of your episodes and connect offline and everything.
Thank you so much. Thank you guys so much for listening to this episode. If you guys like what you saw, be sure to subscribe to this podcast on Apple Podcast, Spotify, or wherever you get your podcast. You can also follow us on Instagram at the OMCG Podcast for more information on guests, preview clips, and more. Please continue to support this podcast in the future, and I can't wait to see you guys in the next episode.